am going to be talking about the promise and peril of interim assessments. And how many of you have interim assessments of some sort in your district? Okay, almost everybody. So there's a lot of different things that are called interim assessments. There are assessments that are sort of the mini summative assessments, and the students are being measured on a scale and whether they grow towards the summative. And then there's ones where the students are supposed to learn a certain amount of content by November, say, and there's an assessment in November to see if they've achieved that. And then there's more content by, say, February, and they're supposed to achieve that. So I'm going to be talking about any of those. I'm going to call them all interim assessments. Sometimes they're called benchmarks. Oh, I have a little thing. This is so fun. Anyway, so I'm going to be talking about the promise of interim assessments. This is what we can or should be able to get out of interim assessments, the primary challenges that districts face, and then overcoming those challenges. So first I'm going to start. I have a volunteer, Brian Struess is going to come up and help me. I am, for the moment, a PE teacher. I'm going to do a demonstration. And Brian is going to take a test. Come on up. All right, so here's my test. I'm going to find out how much Brian has learned about basketball this year. So come up, here's this line, and I want you to throw this ball into that basket. Excellent. All right, were my directions clear?
Pretty good. I need to do it.
Would you do it the same way if I ask you to do again?
Probably.
Okay. Is one shot enough for me to know whether he can shoot the ball into the basket? No? Okay, how many? Put up your hands. 5, 4, 10. How many should we? 5? Okay, in the interest of time, we'll do 5. Whoa. Okay, we know more. Right? But, I mean, thank you. That was very kind. And, yes, round of applause. So what we know is that he could throw the ball into this basket 2 out of 5 times. Is my test a good test of basketball? No. So I just showed you something that is called reliability, consistent directions, and sufficient information to make some kind of decision. And we all hear those words, people throw them at you. We have reliable and valid tests. When they say reliable, that's what they mean. They mean that the kids are going to know what they're supposed to be doing, and they're going to do it consistently, and we'll have enough information to make a decision. But I didn't have a good test. And one of the things I noticed is that as Brian was throwing the ball, he wasn't throwing it like I would throw a basketball. He had adapted his throwing to my test. So because my test wasn't a good basketball test, he was actually learning something else. So I would like for you all to think or write down 3 items that would be on a good basketball test. 3 things. All right. So what should be on my test? How many of you put down skills like passing or dribbling or free throws, layups, that sort of thing? How about knowledge, rules of the game? Not so many. How about physical fitness, stamina, coordination, things like that? Not so many. So this is a skills game. What about communication? Nope. So I could build a test that is demonstration of skills. I could have the students run up and down the court, dribbling. I could have them passing the balls back and forth between each other. I could have them demonstrate their shooting skills. And I've seen that happen, and I would have an assessment of skills. But would I know if they could play basketball? No. So if I really want to know if they can play basketball, they have to play the game. And they probably won't adapt their behaviors for the specific situation of the test. They're going to do a different kind of behaviors because they're in competition with other students. Even if they're scrimmaging, they're in competition with other students. So I can watch them run and pass the ball. I can watch them do their shooting, and I can watch them do their strategies, defense and offensive strategies. So if I watch them, I'm going to know more about whether they can play the game. And as a teacher, as I watch them, I'm also going to notice their strengths and weaknesses in a real context. And I'm going to say, I can see what each student needs to learn to be a better basketball player. Do we have a purpose in skills drill? Certainly. If I want to know if everybody can shoot and everybody can run and everybody can dribble, it's really useful to have tests that focus on skills. But if I want to know if people play the game, I have to have them play the game. And one of the things I noticed as a mom, watching the coaches for my daughter's soccer teams, was that the coaches would pull them out during the game and give them coaching right then, right there, and send them back into the game. And so they were actually learning while they were playing. And so the most perfect assessment is going to be the assessment where the students are learning, demonstrating, and the teachers can help them improve right there on the spot. That's not what our interim assessments do. Generally, they are the skill kinds of assessments, and generally they measure important skills and important knowledge, but they aren't sufficient. So what I have shown you are two big things. One is reliability, consistent and known expectations, so that students will give consistent performance. Even if it's the wrong performance, it can be called reliable, and sufficient information to make a decision. And validity, when people say it's reliable and valid, valid mean, is it really aligned to the valued knowledge, skills, and abilities? So in the case of basketball, is it really aligned with basketball? And alignment of the performance to the game to be played. So what is the game in K-12 education? Achievement of academic standards, that's the big game. That's the game that everybody has to play and we want our kids to be successful with. We have, as communities, come together and identified valued knowledge, historical facts, scientific systems, grammar rules. In every subject area, there are bodies of knowledge we want students to have. But we also, if you look closely at the standards, they're really about performance. When students are learning how to use capital letters and punctuation correctly and grammar and whatever, it's so that they can write. It's so that they can write meaningfully. When students are learning about systems in science, why should we know systems? Maybe we need to know systems so that we can evaluate what's going on in our communities and maybe do a research report on something that's going on in our communities about the health of our water or the health of our air or that sort of thing. So knowing the facts is not enough. In fact, if you look at the standards, almost always, most of the time, the standards are tied to some kind of performance. And now, today, for the last 10 years or so, we've really focused on what's college and career readiness. So it's not just anybody's standards, we're talking about kids who are ready for college and careers. So how do we measure reliability and validity? Very simply is we use correlation for the most part. When you talk to people who are selling you interim assessments, they will talk to you about correlation. And we have some very well-regulated measures out there, rulers, tape measures, they're very well regulated. And so if I measured all of you today, and then I measured all of you tomorrow, I would probably get about the same measure with the exception of maybe posture. And so what you see here in this picture is a straight line, and that line would be no difference. That line says there's no difference between measure 1 and measure 2. In achievement testing, that rarely happens. In achievement testing, we're lucky if we get a relationship of 0.75 or higher. And what you can see in this is that there's a lot of scattering around that line of no difference. So if I measure the students in January and then again in April, we do anticipate that there will be differences, but we don't necessarily want them to be this spread out, because then we can't really predict what's going to happen in April based on what happened in January. And interim assessments that are used to measure growth towards end-of-year standards should give us better information about whether we're actually going to be, our students are going to be doing well at the end of the year. Another thing that's shown here is that we have 2 students with the same score, that's a 59, and they had a 59 in January, but then in April, one of them has a score of about 55, decreased in performance, and the other one has a score of about 69, increased in performance. So what that says to me, and you can see it really throughout this, is you can't really predict what's going to happen in April based on what happened in January. And so if our interim assessments aren't serving us, that's the kind of thing you're going to see. Then the other thing is, so those are our 2 kids, the other thing is there's almost been no growth. The scatter's all over the place. So even though there's this line that sort of fits the data, the kids are all over the place. Some of them gained, some of them lost, but for the most part, they're clustered around that line of no change. That isn't a happy outcome. So this is a different situation. In this situation, we see that the correlation has increased. They're closer to the line, but they're also mostly above the line, so almost all the students have improved. So what we want to see in our interim assessments is we want to see that the interim assessments do a good job of predicting what will happen later, and they help us move the kids forward. So I'm going to show you some real data from real districts in a minute, but so I just want to summarize. The purpose of an interim assessment ought to be to identify student strengths and needs. And why do we want to do that? So teachers can plan instruction to support all the kids to get where they need to go. So they can be good coaches, and they can identify for each student what each student needs to do to grow, to get better, to achieve those college and career readiness standards. We also want to know that kids are making progress towards the end-of-year goals. Many of us are still accountable to our states and to our accountability systems to make sure that our kids are actually getting where they're supposed to get. So increasing in performance is not enough. It's increasing towards some kind of goal. So valid interim assessment would be aligned to state standards, would demonstrate the full range of state standards, so all the game to be played as much as possible, would support instruction so teachers can help their kids, and would show growth. That would be the best. Right? So I'm going to show you 2 examples of where that didn't happen. So the first one is the WERA, is the Washington Educational Research Association. And a year ago in December, 6 test directors did a session on what's going on with their interim assessments and their summative assessment. And they represented data from 12 school districts throughout the state of Washington. And the other one is a personal request from a principal of a K-8 school in Seattle who asked me, help me understand my data, and I'm going to show you what happened with their data. I'm not going to show you all the data that was shown, and I didn't cherry pick. This is really sort of representative. So these are the 4 interim assessments that some of you may have used some of these, but these are the 4 that were being investigated by these educators as they were trying to make sense of them. I'm not going to identify them in in showing their data. I took that identity out, but you can just sort of generalize. It could have been any of these. So this is one. This is a correlation between interim scores from the interim assessment and the Smarter Balanced English Language Arts assessment. And look at those correlations. They range between 0.6 and 0.69, lower than even our, this is okay, not great, correlation of 0.75. And that's fall and spring interims correlating with Smarter Balanced. And if you think about, again, my spread that I was talking about, with 0 is a big circle scatter plot, and 1 is that perfect relationship where there's no difference in between. That assessment was between 0.8 and 0.4. So how do we know we're doing any good for our kids if we're teaching to those standards and there's not a relationship between the two tests? Here's another example. Again, this was from a large urban district from among the group, and they had 6th, 7th, 8th, and 10th graders combined. They had given an interim assessment and the Smarter Balance test levels. Again, this is English Language Arts, and again, I want to say I didn't cherry pick. Same thing happened in math. So level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, they're color-coded. Level 1, dire straits. Level 2, getting there. Level 3, basically meets expectations. Level 4, Yahoo! And then on the interim assessment, below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced. And what we would see if there was a strong relationship between the two assessments is that the gray diagonal would have the largest numbers in it. We would see agreement between what is happening on Smarter Balanced and what's happening on this interim assessment. But what you can see here, if you look closely at the off-diagonal numbers, is that students who were at level 1 at risk on Smarter Balanced were, yes, 6% were below basic, 11% were considered basic on the interim assessment, 5% were considered proficient on the interim assessment. Similarly for level 2, getting there but not at standard yet on Smarter Balanced, 7% were at the basic level on the interim, 15% were at the proficient level on the interim, and 5% at the advanced level. So we have a mismatch between what's going on in the interims and what's going on in the state. This was the K-8 school. The principal asked me to help her make sense of data. They had not met standard on average in their school in year 1 of the 2 years I'm going to show you. They hadn't met standard. So they implemented a new interim assessment in the district. Her teachers focused their instruction around the interim assessment. They made sure that they were teaching the skills that were being tested on the interim assessment. And you can see their progress. It was lovely. Fall, winter, spring, steady progress throughout the year. And by the end of the year, on average, they had met the benchmark or the cut score for the interim assessment. This is what happened with their state assessment. Their scores went down. This was her distress. What have we done? What's wrong? Why aren't we making progress? We've achieved the standard on the interim assessment. And there's the state cut score. They moved away from the state cut score. Very distressing. So what's happening? When academic standards are written, they are written by educators, not testing people. They're written by educators who have strong beliefs about what kids should know and be able to do. And they break down performances, and they identify specific knowledge, and they work hard to come to these standards. 38 states adopted Common Core state standards when they came out. And many of those states, although they don't claim Common Core state standards, still have some version of the Common Core state standards, meaning they're really working on tough academic standards that are related to college and career readiness. The state's tests generally work very hard to try to make sure they measure everything that is in those state standards. They can't measure it perfectly because you only have a test. You can't test the kids all day on what they've learned. But we do try to represent the whole. What happens with our interim assessments is that they generally focus on skills that are easier to measure and less costly to measure. And oftentimes they are item level adaptive tests, and so they're actually designed in a way that moves away from the standard. For example, in a reading assessment for item level adaptive testing, you can't have long reading passages. You have to have short reading passages so that you can throw more items at kids. So we can't necessarily represent all the standards. So if we're only teaching to what's in that small green circle and raising scores on the small green circle, what happens to the rest? And what else is happening? There's the intent of the state standards. I mentioned it a minute ago. The intent is for students to be college and career ready, for them to be able to do work that is valued work, research papers, literary analysis, solve mathematical problems. And if our assessments don't give students an opportunity to do the performance, to play the game, then we can't necessarily represent those standards. So even our state tests move away from the standards to a certain extent, at least the intent of them. And again, on item level computer adaptive tests, we may be pushed even further from our standards. So I'm not trying to criticize item level adaptive tests or interim assessments. I'm saying they're not enough. So 2 key ideas. Alignment matters. We need to make sure that whatever the teachers are teaching, they're getting support for it, that the assessment information that they get provides them the information that they need so that they can help kids, so they can identify their strengths and weaknesses, and so they can be good coaches for them. And interim and summative tests are not enough. We need to help kids play the game. And the only way that that is going to happen is if we help them, if we help educators do performance-based assessment. So when you're thinking about an adoption or you've already had an adoption around interim assessment, ask for content alignment information. Some people will give you statistical information, and that is important, but it's not enough. And you need to ask for, can we see the alignment between your standards that you're measuring and our standards in our state? You need to ask for that. Another is look at sample items. Are they like the things that the students are being asked to do on the state tests? Most of these companies will show you sample items. I go online and I look for them and see what they're doing. And the last thing is use performance assessments along with the tests so that the kids get opportunities to do those higher level DOK4, DOK3 skills. I noticed on one of the dilemmas on the sheet that was handed out earlier that the teacher says, I'm going online looking for DOK3 and DOK4 level work. And it's hard to find. So we have to work together to make that happen. One of the things I just said is add something. So testing time is a big criticism. But I want to say that my experience as an educator, I was a teacher educator for 23 years. I worked for our state a couple of times on leave from the university. And what I learned from educators is that they can spend from 2 weeks to 2 months preparing for tests. It's not testing time that is the problem. It's preparing for tests that takes up all the classroom time. And if we want teachers to be spending their time doing good instruction, we have to help them see the connection between what is being tested and what they're teaching. And so they have to see somehow that running up and down the court, dribbling the ball, passing the ball, doing free throws, doing all of those things is also part of a game, and the kids have to play the game too. More is not better. More testing is not better. Teachers spend a lot of time handing out assignments and giving kids worksheets to do that they never look at because they don't have time to look at it. So why not do meaty, fewer assessments that really actually get at those performances that we care about so the teachers can be good coaches? A few really powerful assessments can be way more valuable. And teachers giving feedback to students, by the way, there has been a lot of research, meta-analysis research done on assessment and other educational interventions and what impact they have on student learning. And of 350 different educational interventions, number 2 in effectiveness was feedback. Why not? Coaching, right? Doing good coaching is going to help people achieve. So be judicious in selection. Help teachers do less is more. Help teachers pick really good assessments that help them be good coaches to kids. Fewer, more effective assessments, and helping teachers see the connections. These are the things that can help make assessment in the district serve the kids and serve the teachers. Principals, instructional leaders, principals as instructional leaders is key. At my table, we talked about principals as instructional leaders earlier today. And it is true that we've found that principals that are in a role of instructional leader will bring teachers together to share lesson plans. I noticed in some of the scenarios I was reading, these teachers felt so like they were so alone. They were figuring things out by themselves. Why? Why should teachers be in the world figuring it out by themselves when there's so much information and idea sharing that could be happening? So bringing teachers together to share ideas about instruction, to observe each other and give each other feedback. Also, bringing teachers together to look at kid work so they can start thinking together about what does quality work look like? What does a valued essay look like? What does real math problem solving look like? And helping them look at kid work What we found in Washington was when we brought teachers together to look at students' performances, either scoring state assessment work or developing the assessments in the first place, they went back to their classrooms and they taught differently because they started thinking about what does good work look like. And it helped them teach that way and improve their instruction so that they were focused on the real work. So principals are critical as leaders, because if principals can't go in the classroom and see what good work looks like, what good teaching looks like, if they can't see the engagement, the purposeful teaching and whatever, then they're not leading. So we need principals that can lead, that can see good instruction, that can provide the kind of feedback to teachers so that teachers can be the kind of teachers they need to be to help students be successful. So leadership is crucial. I heard that at my table, and I've heard it in so many places. I've worked with elementary schools that actually, if their principal wasn't in there being the instructional leader, all the innovations that we tried didn't work. So you're the leaders that lead the principals, and so I strongly urge you to help your principals be empowered, learn more about assessment, understand the standards better, understand alignment better, and help the teachers help each other. Thank you.